There you go. Go ahead, Jason.
All right. Well, thank you, Katerina, and thank you all. I'm honored to be asked to share my thoughts and my experience with you all. Going into this, I want to, my aim is to make myself more vulnerable than I normally would, and to share in a way that, I don't often do. I'm also used to being the one asking the questions, not the one answering them, because as Katerina said, my profession is that of a journalist. It's my vocation, and so it's a little different for me. But Katerina, thank you for this and for being so supportive. And I also mentioned one of the stories I did on one of my recent trips to Ukraine was through Katerina's family. It told me about a maternity hospital where they work and where your relatives work, and helped me coordinate with them to be able to do a story there about this maternity hospital in Lviv, Ukraine. This was, I think it was maybe in February or March that we did that story, and it was one that really resonated with people. And one of the things that speaks to for me is that it's through some of the best stories that I do, the ones that I'm most proud of, that I feel like have most impact, or ones not that my editors have said go do this, or where I've read about it somewhere, but it's through people I meet, and people who share things with me. And I always try to keep an open heart, open mind, because that's where you don't ever, to me, there is a spiritual aspect to that, and that you never know where the next great story is going to come from whom. And I could give you so many examples throughout my career where I, accidentally or through providence, happened upon things that were special, and I made for special stories, and that had an impact on me. I guess the question that you asked, where you asked me to begin, was to talk a little bit about my career, how I ended up becoming a journalist. And I've thought about this over the years, why this became my passion. At a fairly young age, I knew this is what I wanted to do. And I think the great inspiration for this was my grandmother, who lived with my family when I was growing up, until she died when I was a senior in high school. And she was hard of hearing, almost totally blind, and she had moved with my family to Arizona, where she didn't have any friends or any community. She didn't have a whole lot in her life, but she and I developed this very close friendship and bond. And what she was a true news junkie. So in the early years of CNN came on the air in the 80s, that was what was on the TV, and it was blaring because, again, she was hard of hearing, and so we all had that TV it was in the kitchen that was always had CNN on, and we would watch it together, and then oftentimes talk about the stories that were happening around the world. And they're talking about, and she had a real heart for people who suffer suffering around the world. And in the 80s, there was a lot of suffering as there is again today, in Africa with starvation. And we would talk about these things. We would talk about politics. We would talk about all of it. And I became very intrigued by these correspondents that were all over the world, and the lives that they had, and it sort of became a bit of a fantasy for me to be like them, to be sort of traveling all over all these interesting places, be at the center of interesting things. And then again, that happened at a fairly young age. And that became sort of my North Star, that's what I want to do with my life. That's what I want to be. But how do I get there? How do I get there from, I don't have parents. My parents aren't people with, contacts. They're not, in government. My mom was a teacher. My dad was in law enforcement. And, it seemed like that it seemed like something that was almost impossible to achieve, to get someplace that was seems, you know, to be, you know, at the national or international level of journalism. You know, my dad wanted me to be a professional baseball player, and to me, I didn't have any aptitude for that, but I felt that it was sort of like the same thing, the big leagues. You know, not too many people make it to the big leagues, and so how was I going to get there? I was, you know, from, you know, in high school, like thinking, how am I going to do? How will this happen? How will I meet the people who may help me who may, you know, notice something in me, who may give me a chance? And, you know, and one moment that I think was a breakthrough for me was when I was a junior in high school. I'd heard about a program called the Senate Page Program. It still exists today. And Senate pages spend a semester of their junior year in Washington, where you go to school at the Senate Page School, and then you're on the Senate floor, literally on the Senate floor all day long as they're in session. You're there on the run, you know, running around the Capitol, bringing water, bringing podiums, bringing notes to the senators. And I saw them on C-SPAN, and I want that. That's my ticket to, you know, I could be in Washington, D.C. I'll get to meet people. And so I started my own little campaign to get it by, you know, reaching out to my senator. Who happened to get, I was lucky enough that my senator at the time was able to appoint someone each semester. And I don't remember exactly how it happened, but I developed a correspondence with the senator's secretary. Her name is Jeanette White. And Jeanette was, she was just very sweet to me. And I found out later, so I got the job, I got the position, and I found out later that the reason I got it was because she went to the senator and asked the senator, can I appoint our page this semester? Can I be the one who chooses him? And I guess the senator was like, oh, yeah, sure, whatever. And she wanted me to have that opportunity for whatever reason. Well, there was one reason was she had a son who had just died the year before in a car accident. And I think maybe I reminded her of him in some way. And what I learned once I was there was extraordinary about her picking me is that I think I was the only one who didn't have a parent who was either in politics or who had made political contributions. The page positions, it's not a meritocracy. It's going to people who've donated money, you know, a lot of money to a senator. That's just how it is. And so when I got there, I felt quite out of my league, really, with my peers. But I had the opportunity there, you know, you had this, you know, pass to go anywhere in the Capitol, even where most members of staff can't go. And I would go up to the press gallery, the Senate press gallery, and I got to know some of the correspondents and producers. Got to know, remember Cokie Roberts? She died a few years ago, but she was just a gem of a human, and a legendary correspondent. And I would go many nights. I'd go over to where she did her live shot for World News Tonight, and she invited me out onto the balcony, and we would chat. And she was very gracious to me. You know, this, you know, kind of odd, pimply faced kid who was, for whatever reason, intrigued by what she did. And she'd sometimes, like, she'd have to record things, and she'd have me hold the stopwatch and, you know, record to time it for her. I bring that story up because I feel like what's had, I think, I look back now, and there are just certain people at certain times that came into my life who made all the difference for me. And that's what's been about through mine to this day. I just believe in people and the providence of meeting people who can change your life in ways that you don't expect. And I think you also learn along the way that you also too, especially as you mature, you become someone who has an influence on others and their lives when you intersect with them. And to me, there's something so magical and almost, and not almost, but there's a spiritual element to that, to the chance encounters and what become of those, and these other sort of very important example to me. And that is, we talked about this just before we got started, was meeting Rich, and he's had such a pivotal role in my development in many ways, was including my spiritual development. So I guess I'm going to talk too much about my present career, but right now, I'm a correspondent. I'm doing what I imagined when I was, a young boy with my grandmother, and that to me still is very special for that reason, because I was able, not on my own, but because of these intersections in my life, been able to do what I feel like I was been called to do. And if that answered some of the questions that we were starting with, but I think I'll hand it back to you, wherever you want to go from here.
Definitely. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I guess the next question that popped in my mind is, how does your spiritual life support the very difficult work that you do professionally? I have to say, watching some of the stories you've created, they stand out because of their humanity, that it's not just reporting for the sake of reporting, but you really are able to bring an emotional element to it. And that, I think, makes a tremendous difference for the viewer. But I imagine that can be very easy in the line of work, and especially if you're in a conflict zone. So how do you deal with that? And the broader question again is, how does your spiritual life support the work that you're able to do?
It's a great question, a deep question, and I'm not sure I can give an answer that lives up to that. But I think from the start of my real professional career, where it really began for me was in the war in Kosovo. That was 1999, when I was just a cub reporter. And that's where I really had the experience for the first time of meeting people in the darkest hours, the darkest days of their lives. And there was something very special to me about when those people were willing to share, there's something to me that there's something very so profound about the idea of bearing witness. And that was what a mentor spoke to me back then. That's what we do here. We bear witness. And that I think is probably one of my guiding light and principles. I'm there to bear witness and share when people want to share, to help share their stories. And I try to engage in, and it was gratifying to hear that you find my stories to have a real human touch and element to, because that's what I strive for and pride myself on in the work that I do. And so the question you asked is, how does my spiritual life play into that or help me in the work that I do? I think that it's in being humble, but humility. I think that's what my spiritual life, my religious beliefs bring to me, is keep you grounded and never feeling superior to anyone, realizing that you're just, cliched phrase, but for the grace of God. And I always feel that this could be me, this could be other people I love. And so when you see it that way, it gives you, I think, deep empathy. And I think and it's easy to lose empathy, become numb to when you're around tragedies all the time, people who've lost loved ones, and you don't want to lose, you you gotta have a job to do, but you also don't want to. You don't want to become cold. You don't want your heart to become cold, and so that's where my spiritual life comes in, and is that keeping that open heart and open mind all the time. And then I think that well, for me, another aspect of this is I try to meditate. I bring meditation into my life, and to stop and have some calmness, bring some calmness, a moment where where your mind is, about you, but oftentimes my mind is just sort of all over the place, and I'm multitasking this and that. To stop, think, find moments of peace. You asked me about Thomas Merton and why I chose him, and he was a writer, thinker I was introduced to in college by a professor who became one of my great inspirations. He was a Carmelite priest who taught a class called Problem of Gods, and he wanted us to be exposed to some of he was a mystic himself, and to some of the great mystical thinkers and writers. And but Thomas Merton's, I think, prevailing message was that you need to find room for silence, and that we're all so busy. And he talked about sort of American life in the first half of the 20th century being just, everyone is on the go. Busyness was like I think he said at one point, busyness is just it's like a disease. And I think that I read sometimes his quotes from him, and it's the reminder that I need to slow down, stop, think, and find, tap into the silence of your soul.
Very interesting. And I must say, I would also loved the part of the quote that said, gradually struggle less and less for an idea and more for specific people. To me, it spoke to the idea that true faith is loving one another. But what does it say for you? Can you expand on that a little bit more?
I think what he's saying is pretty much, I think your interpretation is spot on, that that it's through people, through connecting, not in the networking way that we sometimes talk about, that's sort of where people use one another, or where people are where there's you scratch my back, I scratch yours, but in a way where when you connect with people on a soulful level, then that's where I think that to me the great part of where our human spirit comes from. It needs that it is nourished, and by having some people who are in your life and will be there in your life no matter what, I think that gives you a lot more strength. And again, I just feel like my life I've just met such interest, people who've shaped my mind and perspective at just the right moment. And sometimes it's people from the past who've written things that I've read at just the right moment that shaped my perspective on the world. And so in a way, we're in dialogue with people who are no longer here. And I'm in dialogue with my grandmother still. See, her memory comes to me at different times, and things she said to me at various moments in my life. And so all the greatest moments for me, and the most deep spiritual moments, have always involved people. They're not solitary affairs.
That's wonderful. Wow. And what can we do as a community, do you think, as a church community, to be that for one another? How can we support each other's spiritual growth from your experience with people who've helped guide you in your life?
Well, I think you guys are, I think we are doing that in so many ways. And one of the ways that I find most moving is when we say prayers for people who are close to us and voice that to our community and have that be heard and have others pray and meditate on that. And I was also, in talking to you earlier before, or this morning, when I wanted to choose a quote. I'm glad I went back and reread some of Merton, because it did reemphasize to me that there's something so powerful in silence. And maybe there are times when we can, it's okay to not be talking. And it's okay for us to have some just silence together, to share moments of silence together. And that's even more powerful than meditation on your own, is to, whether we call it meditation or whatever we want to call it, as a moment of silent prayer, I think is really can be something very special. Maybe that's something we could do more together.
Thank you. Thank you, Jason. I feel like I learned so much even from the short time that we had together. And I see that some folks need to leave. So let me open it up to questions and comments from others at this time. And maybe we can all ask Jason what is on your mind at this time.
I have a question.
Please.
Hello, Jason.
Hello.
This is Natasha. Thank you for sharing for this special presentation. And I have a question. What gives you courage to go to a war zone? You risk your life basically every day being there. This is the first question. And second question, what's your impression of Ukrainian spirit, Ukrainian mentality? I know it's maybe difficult to say in just a few words, but you're off the top of your head.
Thank you, Natasha. In terms of, it's a very good question in terms of the danger factor in putting your life at risk. And I've thought about it recently in terms of, we have certain people have certain duties in life. Firemen, they go into a fire. I'm not comparing myself to a fireman. Policemen are supposed to be willing to risk their lives for a purpose, for the purpose of helping others. And so I think that sometimes I have to remind my bosses of this, is that there's risk. Yes, there's risk involved, but that is this is what we signed up for. And you mitigate those risks as best you can. You try to use all the tools at your disposal, and you try not to do anything that you try not to make mistakes. But there's you're increasing by being in a war zone, certainly you're increasing the chances of the unexpected happening at any time. But I think you have to be at peace with that, and at peace with the idea that there is a chance you will die. There is a chance, a greater chance than if you're sitting at home when you're in one of these places, and being accepting of that. To me, the thing that would worry me more than dying would be being injured in a way that made me a burden on those who love me. And that's something I wrestle with, is is it selfish of me to be putting myself in positions sometimes where I'm at risk of hurting getting hurt in a way, and then I would be reliant upon others. But then I think that's why try to make the work that I do worthy of the risks. At least I try. And as far as the Ukrainian spirits, I'm it's one of the reasons why I want to keep, I've been going back and want to continue going back, is because that, to me, it's such a beautiful thing to see, is when people have people who have decided that they're going to set everything else aside. They're going to set aside whatever their selfish interests are, and they're going to either, fight in some way where they're literally fighting, or just whatever way they can support one another, and coming together. That's a story that I tell often, and it's one that it's a theme of almost everything I do, is when in covering Ukraine, is people rising to the occasion. Most of us don't have a moment, a situation like the one that Ukrainian people are in, where they're fighting for their freedom, for their lives. They're fighting, against tyranny, and we would say evil, and seeing how people rise to that occasion. It's a special people that are able to do that, and people are doing it in every way that they can, young, old. Everyone's I meet is trying to do something. Young people that lost their jobs during the war, they're volunteering to help refugees. They're trying to help others. I've never seen anywhere where people have just come together to help one another and to help their country in whatever possible way they can. And then that's so beautiful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. As a quick caveat, Natasha had written a book in the 90s called Tragic Optimists, as an allegory of Ukrainian nationalism and the idea of God and what it had in terms of Ukrainians' understanding of their own existentialism, their own national identity. So that kind of came across in the question. Anybody else would like to ask Jason a question?
Hi, Jason.
Hi, Cheryl.
I don't have a question, but I want to say thank you. You're talking about silence, brought a dear friend to my mind that I've not spoken to for a few weeks. And what it made me remember is how we could go at lunchtime and just sit out at a cafe in silence for 15, 20 minutes and just enjoy just being in each other's space and company, and how that has solidified our relationship more than any words we've spoken over a good number of years. And so I want to thank you for that. I just had to send him a text and say, I'm listening to a beautiful conversation and talking about silence and the need, and it made me think of you. So I've enjoyed listening to your story today, and the strength in your story, your strength, and your mentioning your grandmother really touched me deeply. So thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. That's so gratifying to hear. And you just did something that I've tried to do more and more, and that is when someone pops into a person from my life, from whatever stage of my life, whenever for whatever reason they enter my mind, reaching out to them. We're blessed to have tools now that make that so easy and instantaneous. And it's always it's often interesting when you reach out to someone out of the blue. Maybe it has been years since you talked to them, and they'll say, I was just thinking of you. There's something that's happened, and at some level you're connecting, and then to have the chance to voice that, and that is what builds our relationships and strengthens them, and gives and strengthens our spiritual resilience, because the more we know that there are people, I think we need the reminder all the time, there are people that love us, and there are people who are there for us. And yeah, things are going good now, but you never know what's right around the corner. But you're ready, because you have your army behind you when you need it.
Malcolm, please.
I found it interesting that Jason had a pretty well-formed idea of what direction he wanted to take in his life at an early age. Something similar with me. I didn't have quite so precise a notion, but at the age of 8 or 9 thereabouts, I had a very powerful desire somehow to be connected with the rest of the world. And I will say, having taken the 23andMe test, I found out that I was even more connected than I thought. And also my early experience reflected the importance of grandmothers. My grandmother took me, we went second class on a Polish ship in 1950 when I was 11 years old. She took me to meet my French cousins, connect with them. And all of that led on to a gratifying career eventually in international relations.
Thanks for sharing that. And yeah, grandmothers can have a very special place in our lives, that endures. And one of the gratifying moments I had in my career was early on when I was at CNN. My Nana's favorite news anchor was Bernard Shaw. I don't know if you remember him on CNN. And I had a chance to tell him how much my grandmother meant to, how much he meant to my grandmother, that he stood for, that he was in her mind and in her conversations with me, so the paragon of honesty and integrity. And I think he appreciated hearing that. It's when you get the chance to talk to have a conversation with your heroes, there's something really special about that. I've stayed in touch with one of my heroes. I was introduced to him several years ago, Ted Koppel, and I now send him an email every once in a while. And I sent him an email when I was in Ukraine, and he said something interesting to me. He said, Edward R. Murrow was his hero, and was his role model, inspiration, but he never got the chance to tell him so. So basically saying that was his way of saying thank you for acknowledging that, and that it can be very special when you can, people that you've admired and looked up to and who've shaped you, to go to them and let them know that they've had an impact on you, that they've shaped the trajectory of your life.
Thank you. Well, thank you. Thank you again, Jason. I think I speak on all of our behalfs when I say how much we appreciate having you here and being vulnerable today, and just teaching us wisdom. I think it's so important to keep an open heart and also balance that with stillness and self-care. And that's certainly something that I will take away with me today. And I see some comments in the chat, but at this moment, I would love to invite us to move on to community prayer. And please unmute your mic and say what you want to pray for, and we will all agree by saying, Lord, hear our prayer.
I just returned from my 60th college reunion, deferred 1 year by COVID, so it was really the 61st. And at the heart of the reunion, every time we hold one at 5-year intervals, is the church service when we remember those that have been lost. And so I would like to say a prayer for all those of my classmates who have gone before.
Lord, hear our prayer.
I'm here in Salt Lake City, and I want to say a prayer for Tony and Taylor Rafa, who were married yesterday. I did their wedding for them. So our church treasurer is now married. So we ask God's blessing on them.
Lord, hear our prayer. I would like to offer a prayer for you, Jason, particularly as you go back to these conflict areas, and may God give you his protection and wisdom as you go through these experiences.
Thank you. Lord, hear our prayer.
Lord, hear our prayer. And let me read the Lord's Prayer then. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our sins as we also have forgiven our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen.
Amen.
And Rich, if you are able to, please say the benediction for us today.
And now may the peace that passes all understanding be with you all this day and forevermore. Amen.
And we're going to close the word. And I will also would like to make, I guess, a few announcements / updates. So I'm putting the donation link in the chat for those of you who want to make an offering. I'm also going to put a link to the Swedenborg Convention. It is my understanding that the deadline for registering to attend virtually in the last weekend of June is this coming week, June 13th. So if you would like to join, please RSVP for that. And Rich, when will you be doing a session with them? On Sunday of 25th, 26th?
I think that's right. We'll make sure we'll put it into the newsletter, all the details.
If we do that. And also we are putting up recordings like the one we're doing today, which reminds me to stop it.